Hi, I'm Tim Janisewski, and welcome to our ongoing study of the first gospel in Spotlight, Matthew. Today we continue with Jesus and the disciples in the upper room as they are eating the Passover meal during the Passover festival, the Feast of Unleavened Bread in AD 30 there in the holy city of Jerusalem. And they have begun the Passover meal, and Jesus has indeed indicated that one of them will betray him, and that individual is Judas himself. Now we turn to the words that Jesus speaks over the meal, in which he identifies the Passover meal now with the Lord's Supper, or the Eucharist, or Holy Communion. We pick up in chapter 26, verse 26. Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." Well, let's get a little background to help on this, and that has to do with that Passover meal. The key Old Testament chapter to look at is Exodus chapter 12, where the narrative of the first Passover is recorded for us. In short, God says to his people that the death angel is going to come and slay the firstborn of every household in Egypt. And if the Israelites, if the Hebrew people would be preserved, they must go to their houses and they must stay within their houses. And what they are to do is to slaughter a Passover lamb. That is, they're to slaughter a lamb and then put the blood of the lamb over on the top beam of the lintel and the two side beams of the lintel. And the death angel, as it comes over, will see the slain blood of the lamb and will pass over that house and allow the firstborn of the Hebrew children not to be put to death. And so that is the case, and the symbolism here is strong all the way back from the initial Passover. First of all, obviously the Passover was an indication of God's protection for God's people. As the word itself says, he would pass over instead of visiting them with death and destruction. But in addition to that, God would pass over them as they were in communion as families together in the presence of God. And this was a strengthening, a link that the people of the Hebrews were the covenant community, the covenant-keeping people of God in fellowship with God as their God and they as his people. And then third of all, it would be a sign and symbol of God's liberation and his freedom from bondage, because this final sign of taking the firstborn of all the children of Egypt is the thing that catalyzed Pharaoh finally to release the Hebrew people to be sent on the Exodus to the Promised Land. And so this Passover meal had symbolism having to do with being freed from slavery and freed from bondage and sent into a new life and a new world and a new place. So there are those three things that are at play: protection, communion and covenant, and freedom and liberation from bondage and slavery. Now, the application that is made here is that Jesus Christ now is holding this Passover meal, but he is reapplying the Passover meal to himself, what he is about to do the next day, because Jesus takes the the bread, and he says, "This is my body." This bread is no longer the bread of the Passover, but this bread is representing or pointing you to my body that will be crucified on the cross for you. And then he says this cup is representative or symbolizes my blood, which will flow at the cross the next day. And no longer now are you to think of the Passover feast, but you're to think of the feast that is fulfilled by my death and eventually my resurrection. You see, the Passover was a type. It was an anticipation of the great antitype, the great fulfillment that would come through Jesus. You know, it's interesting, maybe a little fanciful, but I still like it, that people have pointed out that on the door beams of the posts of the Hebrew people in that first Passover, if you put the swatch on the top lintel and one on the left side and one on the right side and draw the lines between those, it forms the shape of a cross. Is it not at least beautiful symbolism to say that the Passover that protected in anticipation the Hebrew people in the Exodus would become the cross of Jesus Christ, where his body was given, where his blood was shed? Why? So that the people of God, first of all, may be protected from death, eternal death. Yes, we're all going to die once, but Revelation chapter 20 says there's a second death in which those who are evil are thrown into the lake of fire with the devil and all of his demons. And we will not be. We will be protected from that second death as we enter a new heavens and a new earth. Think about that the next time you take the Lord's Supper or communion or the Eucharist at your church. Secondly, it's Jesus saying, this is the place of communion. We have been welcomed into the family of God. We are no longer aliens and strangers to God. We are not enemies with God, but we've been reconciled to God through the shed blood of Jesus Christ on the cross, and we are the community of the new covenant with our God. Remember that the next time you take the Lord's Supper, communion, or the Eucharist. And finally, the note of liberation, that we indeed are set free from the bondage of sin and death and the power of the evil one in our lives, because Jesus Christ has broken every chain. Our chains are gone. We've been set free by Jesus Christ. We are a liberated people. Think about that the next time you receive the sacrament or the ordinance at your church. And rejoice and give thanks that Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed for us, and therefore we keep the feast, knowing that he has given us such great mercy. That's good news for us. And that's Spotlight Matthew. As always, check us out at spotlightgoodnews.com. Like us on Facebook, share us with others, and subscribe and help us to spread this ministry. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time.